the so-called strategic competition is something that is imposed on China. China has never accepted the term. The term first came up actually during the Bush Jr. administration. Around the time he got into the White House, he started to say that China-US relationship is a strategic competition. And then we had 9/11, and then he dropped the term. The term was reused again by Trump after he came into office. But China has never accepted the term strategic competition to describe the relationship. Why? Because first, China believes that such kind of a description is too negative. From Chinese perspective, we don't like, to describe our relationship as competition. Actually, in the Chinese tradition, we compete under the table rather than in public, in politics. This is very untraditional from a cultural perspective. Secondly, Chinese do not believe that this term captures the complicated relationship between the two countries. Okay. Of course, we have areas of competition. We have even areas of confrontation. But a very important aspect of our relationship is cooperation. We tend to forget that when we talk about competition. So China has been very reluctant to accept the term. Sometimes you hear Chinese officials talking about positive or constructive competition as opposed to malign competition. I wrote an essay on this, a short essay on this a couple of years ago. But again, competition is not a term that Chinese government wants to use to describe the relationship. The U.S. determination to engage in a strategic competition with China has resulted in a pattern of behavior that has made the relationship between the two countries increasingly difficult and confrontational. We heard, we have seen tariffs imposed during the Trump administration. We have seen high-tech decoupling that has been going on since the Trump administration, and the Biden administration is accelerating this process. And also supply chain redirecting. That's part of the strategy of the Trump and Biden administration. And also military preparation. So you see, despite the huge deficit the US government is facing, actually they are having a great difficult time to figure out whether they should set a ceiling for it at the moment. They are increasing the US defense budget quite dramatically. And above all, and also building anti-China coalitions. We have Quad, in addition to a lot of military alliances around China. And above all, the efforts to challenge China's territorial integrity and sovereignty over Taiwan. Okay. And of course, in the Chinese eyes, the most offensive and perhaps the most dangerous thing the US has been doing is to challenge China's territorial integrity and sovereignty over Taiwan. During the past decades, the US has reneged on all the three commitments it made for normalization of the relations between the two countries. meaning aberration. Well, I mean suspension of withdrawing diplomatic relations. Let me see. Now the U.S. has basically restored a lot of official relationship with Taiwan, and also aberration of the treaty, mutual defense treaty. Now the U.S. is renewing its defense commitments with the relationship with Taiwan, and also withdraw troops from Taiwan. And now the U.S. is sending more and more military personnel to train Taiwan troops of the Taiwan authorities. So it's under that kind of circumstances that China is rethinking its strategy of peaceful unification. Okay. The U.S. Congress, I mean, after Biden came into office, I think U.S. policy on Taiwan has become less volatile, less officially moving in a more provocative direction. But the Congress has become a major actor, increasingly proactive. So you see dozens and dozens of Taiwan-related bills and resolutions passing in the Congress. Groups and groups of members of the U.S. Congress going to Taiwan as if they don't have anything to do. and two speakers of the House, Nancy Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy, competed in putting the Taiwan problem on the headlines at China's expense. Okay. So the U.S. policy of containment against China constitutes efforts to take China's stake out of the existing international order, one piece by piece. Okay. So if it is successful, if U.S. successfully deprives China of its stakes in the existing international order, then it would put China back to the 1950s and 60s, when China did not have any stake at all in the international order and vowed to do whatever it takes to overthrow that order. Okay. And unlike the old days, however, China is much stronger today. So it has much more capability to whack the order if it finds in its interest. China's nuclear policy has three major components to it: minimum in number, no first use, and nonproliferation. Okay. So as the U.S. challenges China's territorial integrity and sovereignty over Taiwan and China's efforts to stop them in recent years, military confrontation and indeed war between the two countries over Taiwan have become increasingly likely. And given the increasing threat the U.S. poses to China, the increasing number of people in China subscribe to the idea that it's time for China to reconsider its nuclear weapon policy. Okay. Some argue that China should drastically increase the number of nuclear weapons. Okay. Like Hu Xijin, he talked about 1,000 warheads. As opposed to a couple of hundred. And there are other people who argue for even more. Okay? And some people in China believe that China should change its no first use policy. Okay? The US has not committed to it. Some other nuclear powers have not committed to it. Why should China commit it to no first use? And some other people believe that since the U.S. has changed its non-proliferation policy by supplying Australia with its nuclear submarine, and is considering deploying tactical nuclear weapons in Japan and South Korea, China should also change its policy on non-proliferation. Okay. What that means is that if the US decides to supply nuclear material or weapons to countries hostile to China, China should do the same to the US. Okay? So that's the argument by some people in China. And it's gaining currency against the contest of deteriorating US-China relations. At the moment, China's official position remains to adhere to its long-standing nuclear weapon policy. However, if the U.S. pressures on China, especially on the Taiwan problem, will increase, then China probably would have to reconsider its policy on nuclear weapons. So, if one does not wish a nuclear arms race, nuclear proliferation, or maybe a nuclear war between China and the US, it's time to urge the US, especially the US Congress, to stop messing up with China's territorial integrity and sovereignty over Taiwan, and work with China to manage their differences and engage in cooperation where their interests overlap between China and the US. And other countries should resist the pressures to take side and exercise their influence to make it clear that they oppose China-US confrontation and would act accordingly. It is never too late to do a good thing. So let's hope. Thank you.